Invaders From Above, Book 0, written by Derek Slaton, narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. A small group of soldiers sat in a cave overlooking a small unnamed town. They were half a mile from it, residing on a hill that gave them a bird's-eye view of the place. The town was small, no more than 10 blocks by 10 blocks, with very limited power. The sun was beginning to set, allowing the soldiers to peek out from behind the cover that the cave provided. Captain Barker took a knee at the edge, breaking out some binoculars to inspect the town, seeing a lot of movement. "Still look like a hornet's nest?" Sergeant Wilson asked quietly from behind him, dwarfed by his older captain despite being a muscular man himself. Barker shook his head. "Not quite as much activity as yesterday," he said. "I think they are swapping out recruiting classes." "Facing untrained assholes is a lot better than trained," Wilson quipped. "Hopefully it won't come to that," Barker replied dryly. The sergeant nodded, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "The men are ready when you are, sir," he said. "Be there in a minute," the captain replied, still staring down at the town. Wilson nodded, walking back into the cave towards their makeshift operations area, which was little more than a map and some photos taped onto a cave wall. 15 yards deep into the cave, they'd hung heavy drapes to block the light, so they weren't detected via the camping lights set up inside. Barker continued to scan the town, focusing intently through his binoculars. He honed in on a man who appeared to be in charge, barking out orders and sending men scattering in all directions multiple times. Barker deduced this must be Hamza Arain, the suspected leader of the terror camp, a known recruiter and trainer. He was in his 40s, around Barker's age, ex-military and fierce as all hell. He was British educated and used by multiple terror groups for training, which was why they needed him alive. "All right, you son of a bitch," Barker thought to himself. "Your time is coming." He smirked to himself as he turned and headed back into the cave, ducking between the heavy drapes to get back in undetected. The rest of his team laid around relaxing, trying their best to wake up for the night operation. "Evening, men," Barker greeted. Private Woods yawned, stretching his arms into the air. "Morning for us, Cap," he groaned. "These overnight shifts are killer," Private Mayer agreed, rubbing his eyes. "At least it's somewhat cool when you guys are on duty," Corporal Perry quipped, raising his feet and resting them on a nearby rock. "Try keeping an eye on things when it's 120 in the sun." "All right, that's enough," Barker cut in. "The sun is setting and we need eyes on the target, so let's go over the mission again." Private Vasquez sighed. "Captain, we've been out here for 3 days, he whined. "Do we really need to hear this again? Vasquez, I've watched you forget what country you're in, so shut your mouth and pay attention," Wilson barked. "You might just learn something." Perry nodded in agreement. "And besides, base radioed in with confirmed instructions," he added. Woods sat forward, blinking himself alert. "Something other than observe and report?" he asked. "Yep," Perry confirmed. "See, Vasquez? Pays to listen up," Wilson quipped, cocking a brow at the young private. Vasquez shook his head, shoulders slumping as he flopped backwards, closing his mouth to listen to his captain. Barker reached out and pointed to a photo of Hamza on the wall. "This is our target, Hamza Arain," he explained. "For the last decade, he has risen from the ranks of the run-of-the-mill insurgents to being the most in-demand, trained-of militant forces in the region. Every terrorist group, insurgency, and local warlord group pays a hefty sum to him to train up their men for battle. He's British educated, highly intelligent, and by all accounts, one of the fiercest warriors around." Maya scoffed. "So this asshole is what, setting up terrorist gym memberships?" he drawled. "It's a little more serious than that," Wilson replied, shaking his head. "He's not just whipping these men into physical shape. He's giving them weapons training, infiltration know-how, and everything else you need to know to blow up a coffee shop or take on an invading force. So, a full-service gym then? Mayer joked. The sergeant rolled his eyes. Barker cleared his throat, pointing to another photo and getting his men's attention once again. This is Hamza's second-in-command, known only as Azib, he explained. If Hamza is the general, then Azib is the drill sergeant. Details on him are sketchy, but we do know he is ruthless. The man in the photo looked to be in his mid-20s, with thick shoulders covered in scars. He looked like he'd been battle-tested for a long time. On my watch the first day here, he executed a man who fell behind the others and refused to get up, Wilson added. Mayer shuddered. That's one way to keep the others motivated, he muttered. And also shows he has no qualms about putting anybody down, especially us, Perry pointed out. Well, we have old Mayer here who can put down a running jackrabbit from a mile away, Woods drawled. Couple of shots and we're out of here. He mimed firing twice and then waved his hands like a fluttering butterfly. Barker shook his head. Negative, he said. Both men are high-value targets, with a wealth of information about every group operating within 1,000 miles of here. They are to be taken alive at all costs. Putting them down won't save any lives, but finding out what they know could save countless others. Mayer sighed. I was wondering why we didn't just drone strike this place into oblivion, he muttered. Well, that's just one reason, Perry cut in. The other is that we suspected civilians were still living in the town. Turns out we were wrong. Wilson nodded in agreement. Only people in this town are hostiles, and should be treated as such, he confirmed. Outside of the targets, that is. So, Mayer, Woods, you're on first watch tonight, Barker said. We need a head count of the new recruits who rolled in. See what their movement is like, and figure out an extraction detail for Hamza and Azib. Mayer raised his hand. What if we can only get one? He asked. That's a distinct possibility, Barker replied, nodding at the decent question. Hamza is the main target. If we can get Azib, that's great, but not the end of the world if we can't. The privates got to their feet and slogged towards the drapes. 4 hours, right? Mayer called. Yeah, I'll come relieve you in 4 so you can get a break, Vasquez replied, propping his feet up and curling his arm behind his head. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy me some downtime. He wedged a small paperback book from beside him. Shit, man. We've been in a cave for 3 days just staring at a shanty town, Woods quipped. It's all been downtime. Chuckles rippled all around, and the two privates approached the mouth of the cave for their observation mission. Gonna be a long night, Mayer muttered. Woods shook his head. Don't go jinxing us now, he said. The youngest private just smirked as they got into position, and the sun finally vanished behind the horizon, blanketing the entire area in darkness. Chapter 2. 3 hours later. Mayer and Woods sat at the edge of the cave, taking turns with binoculars and taking notes. Woods had a small notebook, jotting down scribbles as they chatted. A bright moon bathed the town in a bluish-white glow, making observing a lot easier. Got movement on the east side of town, Mayer said. Woods nodded. How many? He asked, eyes on his paper. Looks like a dozen or so, Mayer replied. Doing some sort of marching drills. Azib? Woods asked. Mayer shook his head. Can't tell, he admitted. Whoever is leading the drill is out of sight. So that gives us about 30 men in town, Woods murmured as he did the math. Far cry from what it was the past few days, Mayer replied. His partner nodded. Either they're doing a small class this time, or the rest of the reinforcements haven't arrived yet, he mused. Which means we should get this show on the road before they get here, Mayer added. They look like they know what they're doing? Woods asked. The other man looked again. The trainees seemed to be having great difficulty even doing jumping jacks. Their hands and feet weren't coordinated, and they leapt into the air haphazardly. I've seen more physical coordination in drunk toddlers, Mayer quipped. Woods cocked his head. Where the hell have you seen drunk toddlers? He asked. I grew up in a trailer park, his companion replied with a shrug. Fair enough, Woods replied, raising a hand. Question withdrawn. Maya continued to scan the area, not seeing any more movement. The lights were mostly out in the town, except for a main building near the center. There were a few guards outside it, with 4 trucks parked in front. "Any movement on the party house?" Woods asked. "Nothing yet," Maya replied, shaking his head. "If I had to guess, I'd say that's where our target is. Only building in town with the lights on." His partner clucked his tongue. "Could be the only building in town with power," he suggested. "This area ain't exactly prime real estate for power plants." "Gas generator?" Maya asked. "Generator, solar, couple of trainees on exercise bikes," Woods drawled. "Does it really matter?" The younger private shrugged and continued his scan. He studied for a few moments before stiffening. "Okay, I think I found an incursion point," he said. Woods got his pencil at the ready to jot down notes. "If we come in from the east, there is only a light patrol," Maya said. 2 men with rifles, basically marching up and down the easternmost road." 2 men? That's it?" Woods asked. Maya nodded. "All I can see from here," he confirmed. "I've kept an eye on the doors of the eastern building, and nobody has gone in or out in hours. So if there is someone inside watching, they're dedicated." "Okay, so we come in from the east, and then what?" his companion asked as he scribbled away. "Past those guards, it's a straight shot to the target building," Maya explained. "Don't know if we can get in from that side, so we may have to go around the front. But with only a couple of guards, it shouldn't be a big deal. We secure the target and escape out the back while holding off a frontal assault from the west. Easy as pie." Woods shook his head. "It's no good, man," he said slowly. "Captain wants this Azib guy too. Plus, we don't have confirmation Hamza is in there." "I'm telling you, he's going to be in there," Maya insisted. "Man, you don't even sound like you believe you," Woods teased. "How are you going to convince the captain?" The younger private stammered a bit, stumbling over his words as he tried to sound more convincing. "It's all good, man. We have some time," Woods assured him, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just keep a watch out for—" He trailed off, staring open-mouthed at the sky. Maya lowered his binoculars to glance at his partner. "You good?" he asked, brow furrowing. Woods pointed up, not tearing his eyes away from above. Maya turned just in time to see a bright light cascade across the skyline. It grew brighter and bigger as it went, illuminating the entire area. A thunderous boom echoed as it impacted the ground well outside the northern side of town. Maya fumbled the binoculars a bit as he tried to hone in on it. He looked out at the dim glow in the distance. "What the hell was that?" Woods hissed. "I don't know," Maya replied as he tried to focus. "But whatever it was, it's huge." Woods snatched the binoculars from his hands, staring at the crash site. The dim glow began to grow in brilliance, pulsing with light. "That can't be more than a mile outside of town," he said. Maya grabbed his equipment back, peering through them towards the town. The workout group was gone, rushing through the streets towards the building in town with the lights on. "Looks like we weren't the only ones to notice," he said. Woods raised his pencil again. "Talk to me. What do you see?" he asked. Maya watched as the powered building emptied into the street, several armed guards led by Hamza. "Eyes on the target," he declared. "Told you he was in there." Yeah, I'll eat my words," Woods said quickly. "Now, what are they doing?" The trainees and Azib ran to the building, the 2 leaders leaning in to talk for a moment. Several of the armed guards that had been with Hamza headed to the trucks, and Azib motioned for a few of the others to follow him inside the building. A few moments later, Azib and the guards came out of the building carrying an armload of assault rifles. The trainees lined up, each taking a rifle and running to the trucks. "Holy shit! They're moving out en masse," Maya breathed. "Get the captain!" Woods sprung to his feet and darted inside the cave. Maya continued to watch as voices erupted behind the drapes. Trainees got into the trucks and the vehicles sped off, and he focused on the building, the 2 guards still outside. He flicked over to the eastern guards, who were still there. They held up what looked like radios and then took defensive positions, likely having gotten orders. Barker emerged from the cave and took a knee beside him. "What we got?" he asked. "Something big crashed outside of town," Maya explained. and most of them are leaving to go check it out. Meteor? Satellite? The captain asked. Don't know, but it's big, and it's on fire, still burning bright, the private explained, pointing to the glow past the town. Both targets are in the building with power, 2 guards to the east, 2 out front, a handful inside. If we're going to make a move, the time is now. Barker moved sharply and headed back into the cave. Get your gear. We're making the assault now, he bellowed. Chapter 3. Barker led the team in from the east, watching from behind rocks in the desert, about 30 yards from the edge of the town. 2 guards on the street moved up and down, back and forth, looking for trouble. Wilson, Vasquez, Barker said softly. Wait for them to move to the next position and get up there. Both men nodded and stared intently as the guards looked out into the desert, seeing nothing but the cover the soldiers were hiding behind. After a moment, they broke their gaze, moving up to the next position. Go, the captain hissed. The 2 soldiers got up and ran as hard as they could towards the edge of town. They slid down at the building, pressing themselves against it. Barker murmured into his communicator. They're coming up to the edge, 1 block to the north, he instructed. Flank them. The 2 privates broke from position, running up the alleyway towards the first street. They paused at the edge of the building, looking down the street to make sure there weren't others hiding. In position, Wilson's voice came through the communicator. They're moving to the next spot, Barker replied to him. The sergeant watched as the 2 guards walked back to the street, looking both ways before coming back in their direction. Wilson gave some hand signals to Vasquez, letting him know the situation. They pressed their backs against the wall, listening for them as they approached. The guards were a block apart, making it difficult for them to get it in one go. Wilson motioned to Vasquez, giving him a plan, and the private nodded in agreement. The guard came around the corner, and the sergeant struck, immediately grabbing him by the shirt and flinging him back towards the private, who was ready with a knife. He plunged the blade into the man's neck, pinning him against the wall with his hand over the struggling guard's mouth. A few seconds later he went limp, and Vasquez lowered his body to the ground slowly and soundlessly. The 2 men came out from behind cover as the other remaining guard walked down the next alley towards the edge of town. They moved swiftly but silently up to the corner, peering down it. The guard walked slowly, about halfway down the side of the building. Wilson didn't waste time, stepping out into the alley and walking quickly on the dirt road. He got within 5 yards of him when the guard heard footsteps, turning around just in time to see the sergeant rushing him. He tried to raise his gun at the last second, but Wilson smacked it out of his hand just before barreling into him. They tumbled to the ground, and Wilson flipped over, spinning around and leaping to his feet. His opponent did the same, drawing a knife and saying something in Arabic before spitting into the dust. Not sure what you just said, but I'm going to take it as an insult, Wilson quipped. The man let out a yell and took a step forward, but Vasquez came up behind him, jamming a blade into the base of his back, paralyzing him. He covered the guard's mouth to keep him quiet, forcing him to his knees. Vasquez leaned down and, speaking in Pashto, asked, How many men are protecting Hamza Arain? The wounded man looked between the soldiers with confused eyes, as if he didn't understand. How many men are protecting Hamza Arain? Vasquez hissed again. The man didn't respond, just pain and confusion in his gaze. Maybe he doesn't understand you, Wilson suggested. We're in Afghanistan, and I'm speaking Pashto, Vasquez snapped. Yeah, but they train people all over the region, Wilson insisted. You know any other languages? Vasquez shrugged. I know some Arabic, he said. Give it a shot, and be sure to throw in something about killing him painfully if he doesn't respond, the sergeant instructed. You know, to make sure he understands you and isn't just playing stupid. The private nodded. How many men are protecting Hamza Arain? He asked, in Arabic this time. And if you pretend to not know what I'm saying, then I'm going to let my friend feast on your innards. The man's eyes grew wide, and it was clear that even if the translation hadn't been perfect, that the overall message got through. He shook his head frantically and spoke in rapid Arabic. Vasquez listened carefully and raised a hand to calm him down. He says Hamza always has a 5-man personal guard. he said to Wilson, "plus Azib." The sergeant nodded and hit his communicator. "Captain, we are clear and have intel on the target," he said. "You're free to move up." "Copy that," Barker replied. Vasquez and the man exchanged a few more phrases in Arabic that he didn't translate, and then the man broke into tears, muttering under his breath, likely a prayer. The private removed his knife from the man's back and slit his throat, letting him bleed out quickly, and gently lowered the body to the ground before wiping and sheathing his blade. "What did you say to him?" Wilson asked softly. Vasquez shook his head. "Just wishing him well on his afterlife journey," he replied. The sergeant wasn't sure how to respond, but before he could stammer something, the others arrived. "Report," Barker said. "We have at least 5 guards around Hamza, plus Azib," Wilson said. The captain nodded. "Well, let's go get him before the others return," he said. Gunfire echoed in the distance, putting the men on edge. "What the hell?" Perry hissed. "Are they shooting at a rock?" Mayer shook his head. "Don't know if it was a meteor, Corporal," he said. "Well, whatever it is, they're pissed at it," Perry replied. "And with that much gunfire, they're putting it down quickly," Barker urged, "which puts us under the wire. Now, move out." The 6 soldiers moved swiftly through the darkened town, dirt roads tamping down their noise. They reached the back of the target building, the only one with the lights on, and moved up to the back. There were no windows back there, and only a single door. "Wilson, Vasquez, check the door," Barker said softly. The 2 soldiers moved up, the others acting as sentries. They checked the door, and much to their surprise, it was unlocked. They turned and gave the captain a thumbs up, and he approached. "Think you 2 can flush them out the front?" he whispered. Wilson shrugged. "If they don't go running, they won't be alive," he said. Barker pointed at him firmly. "We need Hamza and Azib alive," he reminded them. "And the rest?" Vasquez asked. Barker shrugged. "Have fun and don't get shot," he replied. "We'll set up the Intercept out front. We move on your mark. Now go." The soldiers turned back towards the door as their comrades ran around the building, 2 on either side to flank the guards at the front. "You ready?" Wilson asked. Vasquez nodded. "Let's do it, Sarge," he said, raising his rifle. He opened the door and Wilson entered first, gun up and ready. The building was large, 1 story, and taking up most of the block. It appeared to be a restaurant, the soldiers entering a kitchen. A single burner was on with some sort of stew simmering on it, but no other activity. There wasn't a door, just some beads separating the room. They moved to the edge, hiding in the shadows while looking out at the main room. Hamza sat in the middle, with 4 guards around and all looking out towards the windows on the sides of the building. A 5th guard stood by the front door, and Azib paced back and forth in front of him, with a walkie-talkie, yelling in Arabic. Wilson glanced to Vasquez, pointing to his ears to signal that he wanted to know what the man was saying. The private listened carefully but shook his head, using his hands to motion that he was talking too fast for him to understand. The sergeant nodded, and then made a sweeping gesture. "Go," he mouthed. They peeked their weapons out from behind cover, firing a 3-round burst each. One of the guards by Hamza took a round in the chest, protected by a vest but knocking him down. The other wasn't so lucky, bullets hitting his neck and face, quickly putting him down. The rest of the guards immediately began firing, ripping up the walls to the kitchen, forcing both soldiers to take cover. Vasquez kicked away from it, sliding back behind a stove. Wilson hung tight, firing blindly through the beaded curtain as bullets continued to fly their way. Screams erupted from the other room, someone barking out orders, likely Hamza. "Get ready," Wilson warned. Another torrent of bullets came their way, forcing the sergeant to take cover. As he ducked, one of the guards appeared in the doorway, catching a glimpse of him. As he whirled with his weapon, Vasquez fired, his bullet punching through the guard's temple and dropping him quickly. "You good, Sarge?" Vasquez called. "Yeah, let's get him outside," Wilson replied. Both men leaned out from behind cover and opened fire. They sent several 3-round bursts into the other room, pushing up as the gunfire coming their direction died down a bit. "Move up," Wilson barked. Vasquez nodded and darted through the opening and into the main room. Tables were overturned everywhere, a bleeding corpse strewn across the ground. He immediately darted to the left and flipped over a wooden table as bullets flew from behind another one near the front. Wilson emerged from the kitchen, honing his fire on the shooters at the front of the room. One man got up and took a few shots to the chest, one striking him in the face and sending him flopping backwards. 2 guards covered Hamza with their bodies and ushered him out the front, one of them firing an automatic burst from his rifle and forcing the 2 soldiers to the ground. There was some gunfire outside, but soon everything fell silent. "Sergeant, we have the primary target," Barker came through the communicator. "Get out here." Wilson nodded to Vasquez, and the 2 men got up, quickly moving through the room. They paid attention to the ones that were down, making sure they were dead as they went. When they reached the front door, the last man that had been shot lay splayed out on the floor, missing the bottom part of his jaw. He tried to raise his gun with a shaky hand, but Wilson put a single round into his head to end the threat. The soldiers emerged and found Hamza and 4 guards standing in the middle of the street with their hands raised. Barker and Perry stood in front of them, Woods and Mayer on the other side. "Finally got you, you son of a bitch," the captain declared. "Always nice to feel wanted, soldier," Hamza drawled, a slight British accent in his tone. Barker sneered. "It's Captain," he said. "Apologies, Captain," Hamza corrected with more than a little sarcasm in his tone. "My eyes aren't what they used to be, so seeing your rank from here in the dark is a bit beyond my ability." Barker growled. "Don't worry, I'll make sure you get a good close-up look at me before I turn you over," he warned. "You seem to have a personal grudge against me, Captain," Hamza quipped, and though it seemed he was stalling, he also sounded genuinely surprised. "Nothing I have done in my life has been personal, just business." "Well, buckle up, because I'm going to show you what getting personal is all about," the captain snapped. "Cap, it can wait," Wilson cut in. Barker nodded, and his shoulders straightened as he remembered they were on the clock. "You're right, Sergeant," he replied. "Did you get Azib?" "He's not out here?" Wilson asked, a panicked edge to his tone. Barker turned sharply towards him, brow furrowed in concern. "He's not KIA?" he demanded. As if on cue, a bright red dot appeared on Barker's forehead, the beam coming from above at a downward angle. "One day, perhaps, but not today," a voice came from above. The soldiers in the street aimed towards the roof where Azib knelt behind some of the building features on the front. He held a high-powered sniper rifle, and Barker raised his hands to signal his soldiers to stand down. "I've used this weapon at 1,000 yards to disable a truck," Azib declared. "At this range, it would turn you into a fine mist. If your men do not put down their weapons, they will witness that firsthand." Barker sighed. "I can't give that order, Azib," he said. "So you know who I am, Captain," the man on the roof replied with a short tut. "Nice to have recognition for my work." "Not the word I would go with," Barker replied dryly. Hamza chuckled. "It would appear as though we are at an impasse, Captain," he drawled. "Corporal, if you have a shot at Azib, you take it," Barker said. "If you so much as flinch, your captain is vaporized," Azib warned. Perry aimed his rifle towards the roof, but it was dark up there, and the enemy was behind cover from his vantage point. "I don't have one, Captain," he said. "You could always retreat to your cave," Hamza said, "and we can try again tomorrow." He sounded almost amused, and Barker gritted his teeth. How had they known about the cave? Before he could respond, an engine roared in the distance, growing louder, the horn honking loudly. "Not too late to run, Captain," Hamza said. Barker looked over at Perry, but the corporal shook his head. He glanced at Wilson and Vasquez by the front entrance, both of them aiming towards the 2 guards beside Hamza. "Woods, Mayer, cover the street," Wilson instructed. Both men turned and began to move to cover. "You take one more step, and I end your captain," Azib cried from the roof, and the 2 men stopped in their tracks. They aimed at the street, preparing for a fight. One set of headlights appeared in the distance, swerving side to side. When it was about a block away, it banked hard to the left, smacking hard into a wall and coming to a dead stop. The horn was loud for a moment, before dying out as the engine broke down. Everyone stood in the street, blinking and confused at what had just happened. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Woods muttered. "Where is everyone else?" Perry barked, looking around frantically for anyone flanking them. But even Hamza looked concerned. "I do not know," he said. The door to the truck popped open, and a lone man fell out, landing hard on the ground. He staggered and then tore towards the group, babbling incoherently. His clothes were ripped to shreds, and he was covered in blood, a frantic, terrified look on his face. He continued to blather as he rushed towards Hamza, going past the two privates who were too confused to put him down. When he reached his leader, he fell to his knees and clutched at his leg, speaking rapidly through ragged sobs. "What's he saying?" Barker demanded. Hamza swallowed hard. All confidence shattered, and he turned to the captain man to man, his voice hoarse. "He says they're all dead," he rasped. "You murdered all those men?" Azib cried. "Hey, buddy, it wasn't us," Perry snapped. Hamza stared at the captain, his eyes wide and questioning. "It wasn't," Barker replied, injecting as much sincerity into his voice as he possibly could. Hamza nodded and looked down at the terrified driver. They spoke in Arabic for a moment, until finally Hamza shook his head. "He's not making any sense," he said. "He just keeps saying the man from above." Meyer shook his head. "That meteor that crashed?" he asked. "Did we have air surveillance?" Hamza looked down at the frightened man. "American?" he asked, but the driver frantically shook his head, repeating the Arabic phrase he'd been saying over and over. "He just keeps saying man from above," Hamza said. A moment later, heavy footsteps echoed, hard thumps with a metallic ringing in its wake. Woods and Meyer turned towards it as it was coming from the same direction the truck had come from. Everyone turned finally, staring as a figure moved in the moonlight. The truck driver screamed and pointed, and then tore into the restaurant in a panic. "Looks like we found our mystery guest," Barker said. The person was easily 6'6", wearing mostly black metallic-looking armor. Bright blue veins coursed over their skin, running up the exposed arms and legs through the torso. A few inches wide and very visible, glowing brightly in the night. As it got closer, it became clear this wasn't a person, but a creature. It was sleek-looking, polished with no apparent jagged edges. It had a double metal holster on either side of it, but they couldn't tell what was in it. Its face seemed mostly blank, with only the faintest of features visible through a protective visor. "Captain," Hamza said tentatively, "I'm going to assume that is not one of yours." Barker shook his head, unable to find his voice. It seemed nobody could, as they all stared towards the creature that continued to walk towards them. Once it was within 40 yards, it reached up and touched a few buttons on its arm. A brilliant blue flame sparked up, starting at its right elbow a few inches above its armor. It curled down the entirety of its arm and then curved into a yard-long blade. The creature clenched its fist around what would have been a hilt, if it were a corporeal sword. "Would you like to take the shot, or should I?" Hamza asked as the creature began to move again, now within 30 yards. "Woods, light it up," Barker instructed. The private raised his gun. "With pleasure, Cap," he said, and sent a 3-round burst towards the creature. Instead of downing it, a prismatic flash rippled over the creature, and it didn't flinch or break stride. The bullets were like pebbles hitting a pond, rippling outwards, and with just as much damage, too. "Huh? Captain?" Woods asked, an edge of hysteria to his voice. "Mayor, headshot!" Barker cried. Mayor raised his sniper rifle, quickly firing a single round towards the creature. The bullet shattered as it struck it in the middle of the head, the same prismatic ripple happening from the impact. The creature seemed displeased at the shot, stopping in its tracks like it had been a little stunned. It let out a deafening screech before pulling out a weapon from its holster and firing a bright blue bolt. It looked like a flaming bullet ripped through the air straight for Mayor. The shot was perfectly aimed, shredding through the top of his chest just below his throat. The heat seemed to cauterize the wound, but it left a gaping hole in the soldier, and his body slumped to the ground lifeless. "Mayor!" Woods screamed and raised his weapon, unloading on the creature. A couple of Hamza's guards joined in, the three of them forming a semicircle and moving towards it while firing. The other two guards shuffled Hamza inside, and Barker waved to his own men. "Everyone, inside!" he bellowed, and the soldiers followed the others. The captain stood at the door, watching as bullets continued to bounce off of the alien with that same weird rippling effect, not hurting it at all. It fired another bolt from its gun, blowing right through the body armor on Hamza's guard. The other one ran out of ammo and tried to reload, but the creature darted over with alarming speed, using its sword to slice right through him diagonally, entering at his hip and cutting through the torso. It was a clean cut, with the body falling to the ground in 2 pieces. Woods dropped his rifle and pulled his handgun along with a retractable baton. "Come on, motherfucker, let's dance," he snarled. The alien swung its sword, which Woods slid under on his knees, popping off a couple of shots that were reflected by the strange armor. He lured the creature away from the restaurant, firing a couple more shots. The alien swung its sword, and Woods blocked it with the baton. The sword was hot enough to cut halfway through the metal in a fraction of a second. The soldier smacked the sword up and moved in, firing the handgun as he went with the same reflection results. The creature used its offhand to smack Woods to the ground, and he hit hard. He was dazed, struggling to get up as the alien pulled out something from its other holster. It was a long metal tube that almost looked like some kind of syringe. It jammed the device into Woods' neck and hit the trigger. Rather than dying, Woods looked like he was digitized, a flickering, snowy effect rippling through his body. In a matter of seconds, he was gone. "Woods!" Barker gasped, his brain trying to reconcile what he was seeing. He raised his gun, ready to fight, but before he could fire a single shot, a loud whoosh sound came from the roof. An RPG flew towards the alien, landing at its feet and exploding. The force of the blast sent the creature flying through the air, crashing through the wall of a nearby building. "I have more if you want it," Azib screeched from the roof. Everyone came to the door, clustering around Barker and looking at the flaming crater where the impact was. "Wilson, Perry, go make sure that thing is dead," the captain said, and then raised his handgun, aiming at Hamza. "Then we're getting the hell out of here." Vasquez joined him in holding the terror leader and his remaining guards at gunpoint, staying far enough back to keep an eye on the roof hatch at the side of the building. Barker clicked on his communicator, changing the channel. "Forward base, come back," he said. There was nothing but static in response, and his brow furrowed. "Forward base, we are in need of immediate evac," the captain repeated. "Respond." Still nothing but static. "Vasquez, try your comm," he instructed. "Forward base, do you copy?" the private tried, and waited a beat, then shook his head. "I got nothing, Cap." Barker pressed his gun against Hamza's cheek forcefully. "Do you have something disrupting our communication?" he snarled. "I'm afraid I can't take credit for that, Captain," Hamza admitted. "I suspect our friend outside might be responsible." Vasquez shook his head. "You would think with him being in a million flaming pieces that it wouldn't be an issue," he muttered. "That's because he's not in a million flaming pieces," Wilson quipped from the doorway, with Perry in tow. "What the hell do you mean?" Vasquez cried, whirling towards them. "That RPG was a direct hit." "We found where he landed, but he wasn't there when we got there," Perry explained. "Blood?" Barker asked, letting up on Hamza's face. The sergeant shook his head. "Not a drop, at least none that we could see," he said. "My shot may not have damaged it," Azib said casually as he climbed down the ladder from the roof. "But he is thinking twice about coming directly at us." Vasquez held his rifle squarely on him, but Azib didn't pay him any attention, walking past him towards his leader as if nobody had any guns at all. "Did you see it escape?" Wilson asked. Azib shook his head. "I think so, but I can't be sure," he admitted. "I caught a glimpse of something running off into the darkness, but it was fleeting." Vasquez gritted his teeth, still holding the gun on the man, who finally noticed he was at gunpoint. Azib leaned forward, staring the soldier down. "Either use it or put it away," he said in a level tone. Vasquez glanced at Barker, and the captain nodded and lowered his own gun, prompting the private to do the same. "It seems to me that our petty squabble can wait for another day, wouldn't you agree, Captain?" Hamza asked. Barker let out a deep whoosh of breath. "As much as I hate to admit it, I think he's right," he admitted. "I don't know what that thing is, but if it can take a direct hit from an RPG and walk away, it's an all-hands-on-deck situation." "Why don't we just load up and get the hell out of here?" Perry asked, raising a hand. "We got what we came for." "Comms are down, and I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that wrecked truck is the last vehicle in town," Barker replied, inclining his head to their unlikely companions. "It is," Azib confirmed. "We sent the rest to investigate whatever fell from the sky." Barker sighed. "We're 100 miles from civilization, and I don't think that truck is going to get us there," he said. "So, what do we do?" Vasquez demanded. Everybody looked at the driver, who was curled up on the floor in the corner, shell-shocked and muttering to himself. "We get intel on the enemy," Barker said, and glanced at Hamza. "Do you think you can get him to talk?" Hamza shrugged. "One way to find out, Captain," he said, and led the group across the room, pausing and looking at his two guards. He pointed to the windows, indicating they should keep watch. Barker nodded in agreement. "Vasquez, go give him a hand," he said. The private nodded and ran off to join them, the trio exchanging uneasy looks at being on the same side just moments after they'd been opposing each other in a firefight. Hamza, Azib, Barker, and Wilson approached the truck driver, two leaders and their most trusted men. Hamza knelt in front of him, speaking gently in Arabic. They exchanged a few phrases before the leader finally growled and smacked his hand hard against the wall, startling the younger man. This seemed to snap him into a little bit of clear-headedness, and he spoke more calmly, actually fixating on Hamza's eyes instead of staring off into space. Finally, Hamza turned to Barker. "He says there is a ship, unlike anything he has ever seen before," he said, brow furrowing. "When they got there, it was on fire, and in bad shape. The men spread out, looking for anything." He paused, motioning for the man to continue, and after he rattled off some more information, his voice cracked in terror. "He says our guest showed up and started cutting the men down one by one," Hamza continued. "Some panicked and tried to get away, but there was no escape." "Was everyone killed?" Barker asked. Hamza asked, and then listened to the answer. "He says 2 men were not killed, but they disappeared when the monster stabbed them with something," he explained. "Does he know which men vanished?" Barker asked. Azib sighed. "What does this have to do?" He stopped talking abruptly when Hamza raised a hand to shut him up. "I think the captain has an idea," he said. "I shall ask." The 2 men continued to converse in Arabic, and finally Hamza nodded, patting the terrified driver on the head. "2 of my best men vanished as they fought our guest," he said solemnly. "Everyone else ran, but they stood up to them and fought," Barker mused, "just like Woods." He and Hamza exchanged a look and a nod, as if they were on the same page. "I don't understand," Azib snapped. Hamza whirled his fingers in the air as he got to his feet. "Whatever this thing is, it is not killing the fiercest warriors," he said. "It is doing something else to them." "Doing what?" Azib demanded. "Transporting them somewhere," Barker suggested with a shrug. "I don't know. However, regardless of the reason, they are not here to help us put this thing down." Hamza took a deep breath and clasped his hands behind his back. "What do you propose, Captain?" he asked. "Someone outside of us needs to know about this visitor," Barker replied. "Our comms are down. Do you have any way of contacting the outside world?" Hamza nodded. "I have a satellite phone in my residence on the other side of town," he said. "That should do the trick," Barker said with a sharp nod. "What about weapons? Something heavier than what we have now?" "I hit that thing with an RPG and it did not take it out," Azib cut in. Barker shook his head. "Doesn't mean we stop trying," he said firmly. Azib looked to his leader, his eyes almost pleading with him not to tell about a weapons stash. When Hamza nodded, his second-in-command growled in frustration, clenching his fists. "Our weapons cache is nearby," Hamza explained. Heavy machine guns, some high explosives. I do not know if it will make a difference, but I have no intention of lying down. If this visitor wants our lives, we will not make it easy for him." Barker shook his head. "I don't know about you, but I want to know as much about this thing as possible," he said. "If we're going to beat it, we need to know what we're up against." "Investigate the ship," Hamza suggested. Barker nodded sharply. "We have to," he said. Azib grunted, motioning wildly to the soldiers. "Why are you talking cooperation with the enemy?" he exploded. "They came here to kill us, and you want to join up with them?" "Because this threat is greater than any of us," Hamza said calmly, but not leaving any room for argument with his tone. "If our guest is alone, we can stop him now. If he is not alone, then the world must know. No offense to the captain here, but I fear an army of those creatures invading our land far more than anything the captain can threaten." Barker shrugged. "We're advanced, but nothing like that," he admitted. "And say we help them. Then what?" Azib snapped. "You still looking to kidnap us?" He sneered at the captain. "Put a bullet into the back of our heads?" "I agree with your boss here that this creature is the biggest threat in the room," Barker said. "You help us deal with the situation by eliminating it or alerting my higher-ups, and I will let you walk away." "Captain!" Wilson cried. Barker raised a hand to silence him. "Sergeant, you saw what that thing was capable of," he said firmly. "We would have a hard enough time fighting it on our own, but fighting against them, too, would ensure our defeat." "And you just expect us to trust you?" Azib snarled. Barker stepped towards him, staring him down with a steel glare. "You have my word, Azib," he said. "That's all I can do. You can either believe it and help the enemy that threatens all of our lives and potentially a lot more." Azib sucked his cheeks in, thinking for a moment, and then looked to his leader. Hamza nodded, his expression clearly trying to coax him to understand. "Okay, Captain," Azib finally said with a sigh. "You will have my cooperation." He held up a warning finger. "But if you try to go back on your promise—" "Anything you say next will be completely justified," Barker assured him, raising a palm. Azib gave him a begrudging nod before stepping back. "Sergeant," Barker said, turning to Wilson, "take that truck outside and go investigate the crash site." "Yes, sir," Wilson replied. Hamza raised a hand. "Azib, accompany the sergeant," he instructed. Wilson paused. "I'm good," he said, cocking a brow. "Nobody goes anywhere alone," Hamza quipped. The sergeant furrowed his brow. "Captain?" he asked, deferring to his own leader. Barker nodded slowly. "He's right," he agreed. "The two of you play nice and get back here as soon as you can." "Azib, once you investigate the site, we shall meet at the weapons cache," Hamza replied. "We shall be there," Azib said stiffly, and the two men walked towards the door, looking each other up and down, clearly uneasy about teaming up together. "The two of us can go retrieve the satellite phone if you want to send your men with mine to the weapons cache," Hamza suggested. Barker nodded. "Is it in a fortified building?" he asked. "Yes, it is," Hamza replied with a sharp nod. "Reinforced with steel, just like my residence." The captain smirked. "You know that it wouldn't withstand a direct hit from one of our tomahawks, don't you?" he drawled. Hamza rolled his eyes. "Of course, Captain," he replied with a smirk of his own. "But I know that your tomahawks cost far more than the run-of-the-mill rockets. If I am to be taken out by my enemy, I intend to make sure they pay a premium to do so." Barker shook his head, chuckling under his breath. He glanced over at the window. "Perry, Vasquez," he called. "You two are on weapons duty with Hamza's men. Heavy weapons, armor-piercing rounds, whatever the heaviest hitters you can find. Get them ready for the battle." Both men replied in the affirmative, and one of the guards raised a hand, speaking slowly in a thick accent. "Follow me," he said stiffly. "We go this way." The soldiers nodded and motioned for them to lead the way, following the guards out to the back of the building. Soon it was only Barker and Hamza alone in the restaurant, with the frightened truck driver still curled up in the corner. "What do we want to do about him?" the captain asked, motioning to the quivering man. Hamza took a deep breath. "He arrived 3 days ago for training," he explained. "Given his response to what happened at the ship, I feel like he will do more harm than good if he is with us." "Agreed," Barker replied. "Is there a place he can hide?" Hamza nodded. "Yes, the barracks," he said. Barker pursed his lips and then reached into his vest and pulled out a small pad with a pen. He jotted down a quick note and ripped it out, handing it to the truck driver, who took it with wary, confused eyes. "What was that?" Hamza asked, brow furrowed. Barker got to his feet. "A backup plan," he said. "If this thing wipes us out, it might move on to a bigger target, and if this one is smart enough to stay hidden, he might, just might, survive that scenario. I need you to translate for me." Hamza nodded. "Of course," he said, and relayed some information to the man, waiting for his nod before motioning for the captain to continue. "I have given you an emergency frequency that will connect you to my superiors," Barker began, waiting in between sentences for Hamza to translate. "You can use any long-range radio to make contact, and they cannot trace it. Tell them the coordinates and those code words, and they will send a team out." Hamza finished translating, and then leaned in, his eyes darkening as he spoke in a menacing tone. The driver's face went pale, and he nodded furiously before running out the front door. Barker cocked a brow. "Looks like you added a little extra there," he said. "I may have threatened his family if he did not comply with the orders," Hamza replied sheepishly. The captain shook his head. "An oldie, but a goodie," he drawled. "Almost funny when you realize he's too stupid to know that if you're dead, that threat is meaningless." "One of the benefits of having the reputation I have, Captain," Hamza replied with a smirk. "There are those who believe I have the power to reach them from anywhere, even beyond the grave." Barker sighed. "And here I am struggling to put up a viable threat so that my kid will take out the garbage when he's supposed to," he joked, throwing up his hands. "I need to up my game." "If you need suggestions, don't hesitate to ask," Hamza joked. Barker chuckled and shook his head at the absurdity of the situation he was standing in at that very moment. Parenting advice from a terrorist leader that the soldier had been trying to abduct only minutes earlier. How had it come to this? "Come, my house is a few blocks away," Hamza prompted. "Let us move quickly." The two men headed to the front of the restaurant, looking out to see if the coast was clear before rushing out into the darkness. Chapter 4. The two men drove out of town, Wilson behind the wheel. They were silent for the moment, the sergeant giving Azib a side-eye and grunting, clearly unhappy with the fact that they were paired together. "You do not like me, do you?" Azib finally asked, breaking the silence. Wilson jutted out his chin. "Any other day, I would be happy to pop you in the back of the head and leave you out for the local wildlife to deal with," he admitted. Azib chuckled. "At least we are of the same mind," he said. "I tell you what, instead of being adversaries, let us talk about something we have in common." The sergeant scoffed. "Funny you think we have something in common," he snapped. "We are both fighters who live our lives on the battlefield," Azib pointed out. Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Difference is, we don't target civilians," he snarled. "I have some relatives who might disagree with that," Azib shot back, though his voice was as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "However, we are not the ones who make those decisions. I am just like you. Someone above me tells me where to go, and I go." He held up a finger. "I am curious about one thing, though." Wilson sighed. "What's that?" he asked. "I was born into this way of life, but you chose it," Azib said. "May I ask why?" The sergeant hesitated. He wasn't sure if it was worthwhile to talk so candidly with someone who had been his target near half an hour before, especially about something so personal. But in the interest of the mission, he knew that making conversation would probably be the best course of action. "Short answer is, it's a family tradition," he said, though his tone was clipped. "My grandfather fought in Korea. My father followed in his footsteps, seeing some action near the end of the Vietnam War, but was mostly stateside after that. He was really focused on his career, so I came along a little later than he expected. By that time, we were living in a small town, and I didn't really have much in the way of career options. So I decided to follow in my father and grandfather's footsteps and serve my country." Azib nodded thoughtfully. "That's noble," he finally said. "I can respect that." Wilson stifled a scoff. He couldn't believe he was taking a compliment from this man. He gathered himself and took a deep breath. "So, you said you were born into this way of life?" he finally said. "You exaggerating?" "Not in the slightest," Azib replied, shaking his head. "I was born 100 kilometers or so from here, in a village lost to the sands of time. Things have never been stable here, so you had a lot of tough men, wannabe warlords trying to impose their will on the weak." He let out a bitter laugh. "One morning, we were visited by a small group of these men. They started shooting the men and rounding up the women to take back to their leader. I was scared at first, until one of them broke into my home and grabbed my sister." He patted the AK-47 resting against his leg. "I grabbed my father's weapon, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Much to my surprise, the shot found its mark, hitting the man in the chest." He tapped his sternum for effect. "As he bled out in the entryway of our home, I ran outside and started firing. I do not know if I hit anything, but it gave the men of the village enough of an opening to fight back. Those they did not kill ran away, never setting foot in our village again." Wilson's heart pounded. "How old were you?" he asked. "I was 12, Azib replied. The sergeant let out a soft "damn," shaking his head. "No child should have to go through that," he murmured. "On that we agree," Azib replied. "Good thing you had your father's weapon," Wilson said. His passenger grinned and patted the gun again, almost lovingly. "My grandfather's, actually," he said, and chuckled to himself a bit. The sergeant cocked a brow and side-glanced him. "Something funny?" he asked. "It just occurred to me that your government is the one who gave my father this weapon, so that he could fight against the Russian invaders," Azib replied. "Of course, then my father used this same weapon to fight when your country invaded." Wilson wrinkled his nose. "And who do you fight against?" he asked dryly. "Anyone or anything who thinks they are welcome in my homeland," Azib declared, and then nodded his head towards the ship that loomed a couple 100 yards ahead, still burning. It was medium-sized, about 30 yards long and 10 across. There was a wing on the right side that rested on the ground, with the whole ship tilting that way. A broken metallic-like substance stuck out jagged where a possible left wing would be, flames emitting from it like a gas stove pilot light. The ship was black, but shimmered a bit every now and then, almost like the same shielding that protected the alien. This looked like it was malfunctioning, however. The moonlight was still bright, and as they got closer, they could see the bodies of the dead on the ground. Wilson stopped the truck just short of the battle scene. Both men got out, weapons at the ready. "Follow my lead?" Wilson asked, and though the alliance was absurd on paper, it was the only one he had in that moment. Azib nodded sharply. "I have your back," he replied. The two men moved as one, sweeping the area to make sure there were no unwelcome visitors joining them. They carefully moved through the battlefield, stepping over severed limbs and corpses with holes blown through their torsos. They stayed 20 yards away from the ship as they moved to the front of it, clearing it of threats. There was an opening in the side of it, where the door opened and didn't seem to be able to shut. The duo looked towards it, and then at each other, giving shrugs as if to say, "Sure, why not?" They walked cautiously towards it, weapons up and heads on swivels. Wilson was the first one through the door, having to hop up a yard or so to get in since the ship was on its side a little, resting on the other wing. Once inside, he stood sentry in the doorway, keeping an eye out as Azib climbed up and in behind him. The entryway was small, about a yard wide, the wall smooth, leading all the way across to the other side of the ship. When they got halfway up, there was a long hallway going to their left and right. They glanced to their right, towards an area dimly lit by a blue glow. To the left was the cockpit. "Let's make sure the pilots are actually dead," Wilson whispered. Azib nodded, and they walked the 10 yards to the cockpit. The area opened up to the front of the ship, which had a few yards of space to easily move about. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie, with panels and monitors displaying symbols neither man had seen before. The entire front of the ship was caved in, with that metallic substance splintering, driving from the top of the ship into the floor, right through the two seats. They worked their way up and around the back of the chairs at the bodies laying there, lifeless. Broken pieces of the ship ripped right through their torsos, forever pinning them to their seats, blue blood dripping into the pool below. Wilson swallowed hard and let out a satisfied grunt. "You get what you deserve," he muttered under his breath. "The audacity. How dare you think you can invade my home?" Azib snorted. "Do not worry, my friend. You get used to it," he quipped. Wilson paused, brow furrowing in confusion, and then he realized what his companion meant and rolled his eyes. Yeah, come on," he said, shaking his head. "Let's check out the back." The duo made their way to the back of the ship, slowly and carefully, guns still raised and sensors on high alert. As they approached the back, they came upon a storage area with overturned crates and empty shelves. There was a massive hole in the side of the ship on the leaning side. "So much for finding an alien weapon cache," Wilson muttered. Azib looked around and spotted one small case on the floor. It was caught on a broken piece of the ship that had come down, pinning it to the ground. He pulled on it, finally able to rip it away from its hold. "I have something," he said. Wilson approached as the other man set the yard-long case onto the floor, feeling around it to find a way to open it. "Any luck?" the sergeant asked. Azib ran his fingers along the front edge, and a panel on top lit up. There was a loud click, and the top slid in from either side. It retracted fully, revealing what looked like a large rifle inside. "Do you mind?" Wilson asked, pointing to himself. "Please, be my guest," Azib replied, moving out of the way. The sergeant picked up the massive weapon. It was silver, with blue lines running from handle to barrel, glowing as he put his hands on it. He found the trigger, but didn't squeeze it, for fear of backfiring on them somehow. "Oh yeah, this will work just fine," he said, enjoying the heft. "I believe this will too," Azib quipped. The sergeant turned just as the other man found a silver and blue device in the bag that was the size and shape of a grenade. Azib studied it for a moment, revealing a button on top that was raised about half an inch with a protective cover on it. "That's the pin?" Wilson asked, inclining his head. Azib nodded. "If I had to guess," he mused, "I have worked with dozens of explosive devices from all over the world, and without fail, they all have one important feature." Wilson cocked a brow. "Oh, yeah?" he asked. "What's that?" "Some simple way to prevent the dumbest among us from accidentally blowing up their entire team," Azib quipped, and secured the device in his pocket. Wilson chuckled and broke out his communicator. "Captain Barker, do you copy?" he asked. But there was nothing but static. "Captain Barker!" He gritted his teeth. It was probably just the same thing jamming their signals, but he didn't like not knowing what was going on with his superior. He and Azib shared a concerned look. "We need to get back there," the sergeant said, and his companion nodded, motioning for him to lead the way back to the vehicle. Chapter 5. Hamza and Barker moved swiftly through the streets, staying in the shadows as much as possible. When they were within view of the nondescript house, Barker studied the single-story building. It looked like the other cheaply made buildings in the area. "That's reinforced?" the captain asked dryly. "Are you sure?" "Trust me, Captain," Hamza insisted. The two men ran over, quickly getting inside and shutting the door. Hamza flipped on the light, and Barker let out an impressed whistle. It was mostly open floor plan inside, with large steel beams going through the structure, furniture and bookcases spread out, with a fire pit in the middle. Even though the exposed steel beams made the room feel cold and unwelcoming, the decor almost made it feel homey. "Not the worst place I've ever been," Barker quipped. "Hell, not even the worst place I've ever lived." "It is not much, but it gets the job done," Hamza replied. "Please keep watch while I retrieve the phone." Barker nodded and looked out the window towards the street as Hamza walked across the room. He adjusted a dimmer switch on the wall, making the lights come on just enough so that they could see easily. "Not too bright," Barker warned. "The tint on the windows will dampen it," Hamza assured him. The captain took a deep breath. "We'd better hope so," he muttered. Hamza moved over to a large chest that was covered in other boxes. He quickly removed the ones on top to get to the chest beneath that apparently contained his phone. Barker stared out the window, keeping his eyes peeled for trouble. "I'm not—" The rest of his sentence was swallowed up by the north wall exploding, sending bits of steel and wood flying across the room. The noise was unlike anything the captain had ever heard, almost like a depth charge. But there was no time to think about that, because the impact of the blast knocked both men to the ground. Barker struggled to get to his feet, his head ringing like mad, staggering on his knees. The alien stood in the hole in the wall, swiveling around as if it were surveying the room. It looked towards Barker, still struggling to get up, then to Hamza, who was raising a weapon. The alien quickly raised its plasma gun and fired towards Hamza. The human man darted out of the way just in time, the blue bolt narrowly missing him. Barker finally managed to get to his feet, drawing his handgun and firing several times while moving closer to the creature. Each bullet bounced off of the prismatic shield, doing little more than annoying it. The creature flicked its sword, the blue fire rapidly extending as the two warriors moved closer together. The captain continued to shoot, even though it wasn't doing anything, hoping that either he was weakening it or drawing its attention long enough to figure something out. He dropped to the ground, sliding underneath the swing of the alien's sword, quickly popping back up. When he reached the back of the alien, he took the brief window of opportunity to shoot at near point-blank range. He put the gun just a few inches away from the creature's torso, and fired. The shield activated, devastating the bullet. The fragments flew back, hitting Barker's hand and causing him to cry out as the pieces tore into his flesh, his gun clattering to the ground. The alien spun around, unfazed by the attack, swinging his sword hard and horizontally. Barker tried to lean back to avoid catching a face full of flaming death, but he lost his balance and fell to the floor. The blade skimmed an inch above his nose, feeling the heat from his as it passed. The sword smacked into one of the steel support beams, but didn't cut through it. Rather, it embedded a couple inches in, slowly searing its way through before the creature pulled it out. Barker tried to scramble towards his handgun, but the alien countered. It kicked hard, catching the captain in the chest, sending him flailing back several yards, landing hard on the wooden floor. The alien started to come over towards him to finish the job, but shots rang out from across the room, activating the prismatic shield once again. The alien turned and rushed towards Hamza, who ducked behind a freestanding bookcase, pushing it over. The heavy wooden structure fell onto the alien, knocking it to the ground temporarily. Barker looked from across the room, woozy from the hits he'd taken. He saw the alien's shield activate when the heavy bookcase landed on it, but after several seconds it deactivated as the alien violently shoved the furniture aside. "That's it!" Barker screamed, struggling to get back to his feet. He was winded from the kick from the massive heavy boot and landing on the floor. The alien was already back up, moving towards Hamza, who fired his handgun as quickly as he could, but with zero effect, even without the shield. The alien shut down its sword, getting into some hand-to-hand combat with Hamza, easily blocking his punches before landing a strike right in the man's midsection, sending him staggering back to the wall. Hamza attempted to draw his knife, but the alien backhanded it away, sending it skittering across the floor. The creature grabbed him by the throat, pinning him against the wall as he struggled. It pulled out the syringe device and raised it menacingly. Before it could jam the device into Hamza, however, Barker came rushing in from behind, throwing his weight into a knife strike and plunging it into the creature's middle back area. The shield activated, preventing it from getting through. However, unlike the bullets, where it deflected with the shield quickly flickering on and off, this time the effect was constant. Hamza managed to free a hand up, holding the alien's syringe device at bay as the shield continued to activate. "Come on! Come on!" Barker yelled. The alien started to struggle, realizing that something was amiss. Hamza held the creature's arm which, with Baker's pushing, kept it at bay. A second later the shield gave way, and the knife plunged into the creature's back. There was a loud, deafening screech from the alien as bright blue blood began to run down its back. It delivered a forceful elbow to the side of Barker's head, allowing it to break free. As it ran off, Hamza rushed over to get his gun from the ground to take advantage of the shield being off. As he aimed, the creature rushed out of the hole in the wall, avoiding the potential attack. "Are you okay, Captain?" Hamza asked. Barker was woozy, struggling to get to his feet, ears ringing from the elbow impact to the side of his head. "Nothing a bottle of ibuprofen and rum wouldn't cure," he quipped. "I'm afraid I'm short of both of those items," Hamza said. "It's fine," Barker replied with a sigh. "I'll settle for chopping this alien bastard up into 1,000 pieces." Hamza nodded sharply. "That I can help you with," he promised. "But I must ask, how did you break through its shield?" "The bookcase you pushed onto him activated the shield," Barker explained. "After a few seconds, it went away. It made me realize that maybe it only had the capability to be on for a few seconds at a time. So I played a hunch and went for my knife." Hamza nodded thoughtfully. "I believe your hunch paid off, Captain," he said, sounding impressed. "Based on that scream, I'd say we pissed it off pretty good, too," Barker mused. "That tends to happen when you stab something in the back," Hamza quipped. "Or anywhere, really." The captain nodded with a tired chuckle. "That is true," he agreed. "Come, let me get the phone," Hamza said, and led him over to the pile of boxes that was now in disarray. He let out a frustrated grunt at the sight of a plasma blast in the side of the chest that he'd been looking for. He rummaged around inside but could only find a small fragment of the keypad. He held it up to show Barker. "We just cannot catch a break," the captain muttered, shaking his head. Hamza cocked a brow when he spotted the syringe device that the alien had left behind on the floor. "That may not be entirely true, Captain," he said, and pointed. Barker walked over and picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. Hamza joined him, and the duo examined the syringe for a few moments, trying to figure it out. It had a pistol grip with a trigger, and there were small metallic objects inside of the syringe tube. "This is what they injected into your man that caused him to vanish," Hamza said. "I wonder if it is a weapon or something else." Barker shrugged. "One way to find out," he said, and headed over to a nearby table. He studied the device for another moment before finding the trigger and positioning the barrel of the syringe just over the tabletop. He pulled the trigger, and a single one of the metallic bits popped out, no larger than a dime. In a dim light, he saw a spike on one end, and layers of light blue electronics along the face of it. When it hit the table, it glowed and then petered out, going dormant. "Well, that all but confirms my transportation theory," he said, motioning to the device. "If this device was a weapon, this table should have vanished." "Do you think it only works on living tissue?" Hamza asked as he walked over. Barker nodded. "That's my working theory," he said. "Given who they have taken so far, it appears as though they want warriors, not just warm bodies." "For what purpose?" Hamza asked. Barker shrugged. "I have no clue," he admitted. "Regardless, we need to get to the weapons cache, now that we know how to fight this thing." "Agreed," Hamza replied. "Let us move swiftly." They ran to the hole in the wall, looking out to make sure the alien was gone. There was a bit of glowing blue blood on the ground leading towards the direction of the weapons cache. "We must hurry," Hamza hissed, and they took off running, putting aside stealth in favor of speed. Chapter 6. Perry, Vasquez, and the two guards rummaged through box after box at the large weapons cache building. The layout was similar to Hamza's residence, with steel support beams scattered throughout the open layout. There were boxes and crates everywhere, none of them open. Perry and one of the guards had crowbars and pried open boxes as the other two watched. The corporal cracked open one to reveal loose rifle ammunition. Vasquez reached in, pulling out several before tossing them back with a scoff. "Regular ammo," he snapped. "What the hell, man? Where's the good stuff?" He looked over his shoulder at the two guards who both shrugged back at him as they pulled out AK-47s from another box. "We have to keep looking," Perry urged. He approached the next crate, slamming the crowbar into the gap between the lid and base, and prying it open. Once it started to crack, Vasquez pushed up, and both soldiers grinned at the sight before them. "About damn time," Vasquez cried, reaching in and pulling out a 50 cal machine gun. He checked it over quickly to make sure it was in operational condition. "We good?" Perry asked, cocking a brow. Vasquez nodded emphatically. "Oh yeah, looking good," he said. Now just need ammunition." Perry turned to the guards and let out a whistle to get their attention. He pointed to the heavy-duty weapon they'd found and made guns with his fingers, indicating that they needed bullets. One of the guards nodded and rushed over to one of the boxes they'd already been through and pulled out a heavy stack of chain ammunition, about 100 rounds, carrying it over to Vasquez. "There is more in the box," he said thickly. The private nodded, pointing towards the open area in the middle of the room. "Okay, bring it over there," he instructed, and the guard nodded before jogging back towards the crate. Vasquez cocked his head, thinking for a moment as he eyed the box full of AK-47s. "Hey, Corporal, I have an idea," he said slowly. "Let's get some of these gun boxes and build a machine gun nest." Perry grimaced. "You saw the weapons that thing has? Do you really think some boxes are going to do much?" he asked. "I think it'll give me a platform to wield this bad boy," Vasquez quipped, swinging the gun around and miming spraying bullets everywhere. Perry shrugged. "Fuck it. Good enough of a reason, I guess," he admitted. He let out a whistle to get the attention of the guards. He pointed to the boxes and motioning to the open area. "We need to move these boxes over there," he said slowly. The men furrowed their brows, not seeming to understand. Perry tried again and then shook his head, taking the machine gun and putting out the legs, setting it on a nearby crate. He then took the gun over to the center of the room, holding it in the air about crate high before simulating firing it. The guards both nodded, finally understanding what he was getting at. "We will get them moved," one of them said. Perry nodded and set the gun down in the middle of the room, returning to the crates and his crowbar, working on another box. The next one had combat knives in it, 50 or so in boxes with sheaths. He muttered obscenities under his breath and shoved it aside to get to the one below it. "Where the hell are all the high explosives?" he asked nobody in particular. "Grenades? I'd even settle for an M80 at this point." He pried open the next crate and let out a sigh of relief. "Jackpot!" Inside lay 4 RPGs, with a rocket for each one. He tossed the crowbar to the side and pulled them out one by one, working on getting them loaded and ready for action. A banging on the door startled him, and everyone stiffened as one of Hamza's guards ran over, sliding over the little metal door on the viewer window. He quickly opened the door, and Barker and Hamza rushed in, though they looked battered and were moving slower than they should have been. "Captain, you okay?" Perry demanded. Barker gave him a thumbs up. "Yeah, that thing knocked the hell out of us, but I didn't let it get away unscathed," he huffed. "You kill it?" Vasquez asked, sounding almost petulant. "No, but I managed to break through its shield," Barker replied. Vasquez and Perry shared an excited glance, nodding at each other. "I'm gonna cut that bitch in half with that 50 cal, Vasquez declared, cracking his knuckles. Perry grinned and then turned back to Barker. "How did you break the shield, Cap?" he asked. "My knife," Barker replied. The soldiers blinked at him in confusion. "A knife?" Vasquez asked, flabbergasted. "Yeah, keeping the blade pressed into it kept the shield activated," Barker explained. "After a few seconds it shut down, and I was able to get the knife into its back." Perry jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "Well, if you need a new knife, I found a whole box of them over there," he quipped. "Let's hope I don't need it," Barker replied. "With any luck, that knife broke its shield and we can take it out like any other threat." "And if you didn't?" Vasquez asked. Barker took a deep breath. "Then I hope you like knife fights, Private, because that's the only thing that has worked on it so far," he said. Hamza approached from having conferred with his men. "I have told my men about the knives and the shield," he explained. "Good," Barker said with a sharp nod. "Have your men heard from Azib and Wilson?" Hamza shook his head. "No, they have not," he said. Barker clicked his communicator. "Sergeant Wilson, do you copy?" he asked, and waited. But there was still just static. "Sergeant Wilson, report!" he demanded. But still nothing. "Comms are still down, so either it's a coincidence or that thing is jamming it." "Maybe you breaking its shield spooked it," Perry suggested. Vasquez rolled his eyes. "Come on, Corporal. When are we ever that lucky?" he drawled. "Corporal?" Barker asked. When you were going through those crates, did you come across anything steel? Beams, spears, anything made of metal? Perry thought for a moment and then motioned over his shoulder. I think there are some machetes in the knife crate, but other than that, I haven't seen anything, he replied. Why? There are some building materials near the back, Hamza cut in. No spears, but there is steel rebar. Okay, have your men connect 3 or 4 of them together into something I can wield, Barker instructed. If that thing breaks out its plasma sword, or whatever the hell that thing is, we're going to need something to defend ourselves with. Vasquez's eyebrows rose. And you think steel rebar is going to do the trick? He asked incredulously. I saw it impact with one of those steel beams, and it only went in a few inches, Barker explained, motioning to one of the supports for the building. The rebar might only be good for 1 block, but that sounds a hell of a lot better than no blocks. Hamza nodded. I will make it so, he said, and headed towards his men, barking out orders in Arabic. What are the defenses looking like? Barker asked, turning back towards his soldiers. I have a 50 cal set up in the center of the floor, Vasquez said. Just before you got here, we were moving some of the gun crates to the center to make a gunner's nest. Barker nodded. I like it, he said. Just make sure you can maneuver quickly, because this thing doesn't like to use doors. The soldiers nodded and headed off to build their fortification. The captain walked over to the crate of blades, digging through and picking out a new knife. He paused and then decided to grab a couple more, putting one in his boot and another one on the other side. Just in case that shield wants to come back, he muttered to himself. He looked back towards the center of the room, watching as the men built the gunner's nest and got the 50 cal set up. He looked past them, finding Hamza, who was waving him over. The captain sauntered towards him, raising a hand. What you got for me? He asked. Hamza picked up a heavy package of rebar, easily 6 feet long. There were 4 1-inch wide pieces that were zip-tied together to secure it. A weld would be better, he admitted, but I'm afraid we might not have that kind of time. Barker nodded as he took the weapon. This will do just fine for the moment, he said. Once we get things secure, we can go back and make a few... A loud thud against the metal door echoed, startling everyone. There was a long silence following, and the captain raised his makeshift weapon. Sergeant, he asked loudly, is that you? Another loud thud, this time causing the hinge to budge ever so slightly off of the mooring from the wall. I think we have a guest, Captain, Hamza warned. Barker took a deep breath. Guessing you don't get too many Jehovah's Witnesses in these parts? He asked. I'm afraid not, Hamza quipped. The next thud was even louder, part of the wall breaking off at the hinges, though the door stayed solid. Vasquez, Barker called. When that door opens, you hold that trigger down until you got nothing left, or that thing is a puddle on the floor. You got it? Hell yeah, Captain, the private bellowed from the makeshift gun nest. Hamza, tell your men to get blades ready, Barker continued. If that thing's shield is up, we will have to fight hand to hand. Hamza rattled off in Arabic, and the guards pushed back a little, brows furrowed in confusion. He raised his voice and repeated his instructions louder, pulling out his own knife. They drew machetes and fell into fighting stances, however reluctant they seemed. The banging on the door continued, the intensity growing with each strike. The top hinge on the door finally broke free from the wall, which spelled doom for the bottom one. The next hit was the final one, and the door collapsed, landing hard on the floor. The alien stepped inside, massive boots echoing with confidence as it surveyed the room, and letting out a deafening, almost pissed-off sounding scream. "Suck on this, bitch!" Vasquez shrieked, and held down the trigger of the 50 cal, sending a torrent of bullets towards the enemy. The private laughed maniacally as he fired, but that quickly faded once it was clear that the prismatic shield was operational and deflecting his spray. This went on for 3 seconds before the alien darted to the side, away from Barker and the others. Vasquez hesitated, not expecting the move, which allowed the alien's shield to shut down for a brief moment. "Keep firing!" Perry barked. Vasquez adjusted his aim, trying to find the target again, but it was moving too quickly, ducking behind some of the crates at the far end of the room, away from everyone. "Keep your finger on that trigger, Vasquez," the corporal instructed. "If that thing flinches, I'm unloading on it," the private confirmed. There was a tense silence as they awaited the alien coming out of hiding, nobody wanting to move. Finally, after several moments, a bright blue plasma blast shot through one of the crates, headed straight for the gunner's nest. The bolt moved quickly, not giving the soldiers any time to react. The impact was at the front of the 50 cal gun, blowing it apart and sending Vasquez to the ground, hard. Perry let out a primal scream, leaping over the barricade and rushing towards the enemy with his machete drawn. Rather than fire again, the alien stepped through the broken crates and activated its plasma sword. The bright blue blade was ready for action. Perry came in swinging wildly, driving the machete straight down, hitting nothing but the floor as the alien deftly stepped back. The creature retaliated, swinging the flaming blade which the corporal ducked. Perry stabbed with the machete, bouncing it off the shield, not prepared for the feedback force. The alien swung the sword again, and the corporal instinctively blocked with his machete. Barker watched helplessly as the plasma cut straight through the blade like it was paper mache. The blade didn't stop moving as it went right through Perry's upper torso, only coming to a rest when the wielder wanted it to. The corporal staggered a bit, his legs twitching with spasms as his severed arm hits the floor. His brain had just enough blood left to know that this was the end, and he tried to speak, but instead gurgled up blood, his eyes meeting Barker's before he collapsed to the ground in multiple pieces. The alien turned towards the others, letting out a yell and putting its arms out to the side, as if it were declaring the others come at it. "What is it doing?" Hamza hissed. Barker growled. "Taunting us," he said flatly. "Good to know that they have egos," Hamza quipped. "Tell your men to fan out around me," Barker instructed. "I have the reach and can block his sword, hopefully. I will try and keep his attention so one of you can get close enough to stab him. It took 4 or 5 seconds with my knife, so I will try and hold out for that long." Hamza gave the orders, and his men replied, both letting out a warrior grunt at the end. "Let's do this," Barker said, and led the 4 men across the room, taking point while the others fanned out. The alien watched them approach, since it was in a flat, wide-open space standing in the middle of 2 steel pillars, 10 feet to either side of it. Barker walked by the machine gun nest, glancing down at Vasquez. The private was bleeding, but slowly coming back to coherency. "Get on your feet, soldier," Barker instructed. "We need you." Vasquez tried to get up, but he staggered, falling back to his knees. "I'll be there when I can, Captain," he slurred. Barker nodded and continued to lead the group forward. He stopped a few feet from the alien, his heavy 6-foot rebar weapon at the ready. Hamza was to his right, a few feet over, as each of the guards walked around the creature, taking up positions by either of the steel beams. There was a several moments-long standoff as Barker stared down the alien. The creature's sword emanated a bright blue flickering light as it stood, ready for battle. Barker looked at the ground towards Perry, or what was left of him, before looking back at the alien. "Perry was a friend of mine," the captain declared loudly. "You're going to pay for that, you son of a bitch!" He let out a yell, prompting Hamza and his men to do the same. Barker darted forward, using the rebar like a battering ram, and jabbed it forward towards the creature. The alien swiped up with its blade, knocking it out of the way and cutting through about 60% of the front tip. Barker retreated a little as the creature counterattacked, swinging horizontally towards Barker's head. After the initial volley was over, they stood still for a moment, with Barker looking at the front edge of the rebar. The tip was burned through, and there was about 6 inches hanging loosely. "I can block it!" Barker cried. "Get it!" The guard to the creature's left yelled out, coming in for an attack, swinging horizontally across his body towards the alien's back shoulder. He landed a direct hit, but the shield reflected the blade instantly. His partner came in from the other side at nearly the same moment, delivering a similar strike with the same result. The alien swung its sword around, but the man on the right ducked under it while lunging forward, jamming the tip of the machete into the alien's gut area, causing the shield to activate. The alien raised its sword up, and made to bring it down onto the man, but Barker lunged forward, sticking the rebar in to catch the sword before it landed a hit. The sound of searing metal filled the air as the blade cut through a significant portion of the rebar. Instead of pulling back, the alien forced the blade downwards, trying to cut through. "Move, man, move!" Barker screamed. The guard, though not understanding the words, seemed to catch the urgency in the captain's voice and rolled out of the way, disengaging the shield. The alien's sword hit the ground, scorching the floor. The guard behind the alien ran forward and leapt into the air, attempting to get onto the creature's back. The alien seemed to instinctively know this, however, and spun around while falling to the ground, bringing its blade upwards and across. The sword ripped through the head of the leaping man, cutting him clear across at the eyes. He was dead before his corpse hit the floor. Hamza leapt into action, driving his machete towards the alien's head as it landed on its back. The creature reached up and caught the blade with its offhand, activating the shield. Hamza put his full weight into it as Barker rushed in with the rebar to block the alien as it swung the sword upwards. 3 seconds went by as the other guard rushed to put his machete into play, jamming it into the alien's side. 4 seconds in, the shield was still up, and the plasma blade had nearly melted through the rebar. The guard noticed this, eyes widening. "Hamza!" he yelled in warning. He saw that his guard had a blade activating the shield, so he let go and rolled out of the way of the sword as the rebar gave way. Just as the shield gave out at 5 seconds, the alien gained control of Hamza's machete, gripping it tightly and cutting into its hand. It smacked the guard in the face with the handle end, sending the man staggering backwards. The shield reset before the guard could cause any real damage, and the alien used its free hand to pop itself off of the ground, immediately rushing towards the staggered guard. The man barely had time to regain his senses as the alien swung the plasma sword upwards, right through the center of the man, cutting him cleanly in two. The alien stood there for a moment, waiting for him to peel away to either side before turning around to stare down both Hamza and Barker. "I will follow your lead," Hamza said firmly. Barker looked at the rebar, which was down to 4 feet long. He shook his head. He only had one more chance at it. "It's near the crates," Barker said. "I'm going to rush him and try to pin his arm against it. You get in there quick." It was the only plan, and Hamza nodded. "On your mark," he agreed. Barker nodded and readied himself as the alien just stared them down, almost in a taunting fashion. The captain let out a yell before running straight for it, the alien standing close. As he got close, the alien reared back and swung across its body, but Barker kicked up into a higher gear, getting there sooner than the creature had anticipated. He had a firm grip on either end of the rebar, placing the center of it on the alien's wrist and pushing it back. The crate was still a couple of feet away, and Barker just didn't have the momentum to force the creature back. Rather than fight the captain, the alien punched him in the side of the head, which staggered him. Barker fell to the ground in a woozy heap. Hamza was a few steps away as the alien regrouped, easily deflecting the attack and shoving him backwards. Before Hamza could recover, the creature kicked him forcefully in the chest, sending him tumbling to the ground beside Barker. The two men were dazed and wheezing from the powerful physical attack, looking up helplessly at the alien marching purposefully towards them. Before it got to them, however, a few shots hit it from the side, activating the prismatic shield. They all looked over at Vasquez, propped up on a crate, firing his handgun. He looked in rough shape, bleeding from all the shrapnel from the 50 cal that had exploded in his face. "Come get me, you bastard!" he sputtered, words slurring together as his eyes unfocused and refocused. "Come get me! Come!" He ran out of ammunition, which wasn't doing any good anyway. The alien strolled over to him, sword at the ready. But just before it reached him, a yell echoed from the broken-down door. "Knock, knock, motherfucker!" Wilson cried, and raised the large alien rifle at the creature. The alien didn't even react, just stared down the barrel as the sergeant squeezed the trigger. There was a brief power-up phase, where the blue running through the weapon began to glow brightly. Lights flashed around the trigger, but before anything happened, the lights all turned red. "What the hell?" Wilson stammered and looked down at the gun. He hissed as something jabbed into his hand and let go of the gun, staring in shock at a small injection site in his palm. His mouth opened in a soundless scream as he began digitizing, just like Woods had earlier, vanishing in seconds. The gun clattered to the floor, and Azib stood over it helplessly, eyes wide. The alien looked down at Vasquez, who was trying to reload his weapon. Before he could get another mag in, the plasma sword flashed through his chest, impaling him brutally. The alien swung its sword free and turned back towards Barker and Hamza. "You are not getting away that easy," Azib screamed, and pulled out the grenade. He flicked the safety port away, and a silver metallic button popped up. Instead of pushing it with his thumb, he glanced down at the gun that Wilson had been using, not wanting to suffer the same fate. He smirked, not allowing himself to be tricked, and spun the grenade around in his hand before slamming it down onto the floor, hoping that it wasn't an instantaneous explosion. The grenade started to glow, blue gel pooling at the bottom, hovering just above the base. Azib quickly lobbed it towards the alien, and as it flew through the air, the blue glob grew quickly, surrounding the weapon. His throw was on target, landing on the back of the alien and sticking to it. The creature stopped moving and looked over his shoulder as the goo seemed to solidify on its body. The alien let out a scream and manually triggered the prismatic shield just as the device went off. The blast was intense, but focused on the target, sending the creature flying to the far side of the room and into the wall, crumpling into a staggered heap on the ground. Azib drew his weapon and fired, trying to hit it before giving it a chance to get up. But, despite the blast, the creature's shield was still active. The shooting got its attention, and the alien tried to get up, but it seemed that the force of the blast had shaken it up. The creature reached up and hit a few buttons that were flush against its chest. Blue veins coursed brightly along its flesh, and it let out an agonized, horrific scream, as if it were in pain. Then it leapt to its feet, seeming almost supercharged, before running away from Azib towards the back wall. It lowered its shoulder, smashing right through the steel-reinforced wall and out into the darkness. "That was unexpected," Hamza quipped. "Are you okay, Captain?" Barker sat up slowly as Azib approached, helping his leader to his feet. "What was that thing?" the captain asked. "I found it in the ship," Azib said, "along with the gun." Barker shook his head. "What happened to Sergeant Wilson?" he demanded. "The same thing that happened to your man who rushed the creature," Azib said. "He just vanished." The creature's gaze darkened. "That doesn't make any sense," he said. "It happened right beside me, Captain," Azib snapped. "I know what I saw." Barker waved him off. "I saw it too," he said, "but it doesn't make any sense." "It looked like something stabbed his hand as he pulled the trigger," Azib suggested. The captain paused, his eyes widening. "A fail-safe?" Hamza chimed in. "If someone other than the visitor tries to use the weapon, it transports them?" Barker let out a deep sigh. "If they are taking warriors somewhere else like we think they are, then it makes sense," he admitted, running a hand over the back of his head in frustration. "Guess they figure if someone can take their weapon from them, then they're a warrior." "How was it able to run through the wall?" Azib wondered, shaking his head and looking back at the gigantic hole. "I did not realize it was that strong." "It activated something before it did that," Hamza explained. Barker nodded in agreement. "And from the sound of that scream, it was not a pleasant experience," he added. "Whatever it was, let's just hope it was a one-time use thing, because it's kicking our asses pretty efficiently without that added strength." Azib looked over to where the alien hit the wall, seeing a small puddle of blue on the ground. He knelt beside it, pursing his lips. "I hurt it," he called. Barker and Hamza approached. "Is that blood?" the latter asked. Azib nodded. "Yes. There were 2 more of them at the ship. They did not survive the crash." He motioned to the puddle. "This substance was pooled below their bodies." "Do you have any more of those grenades?" Barker asked. Azib shook his head. "There was only one," he said. "There was a hole in that side of the ship where the cargo was." "Damn," Barker growled. He thought for a few moments, turning back towards Hamza and Azib. It suddenly dawned on him that he was outnumbered by the men who had originally been his targets. "I guess this is a good time to ask if you 2 are willing to continue this fight," he asked sheepishly. It took my team 6 months to track you down, and with one trigger pull, you can be in the wind again. The two men looked at each other, and then Hamza raised his chin. This creature threatens my home, just as much as it threatens yours, he declared. It must be stopped. Barker nodded in appreciation, his shoulders relaxing. Besides, we can always kill you afterwards, Azib said with a lopsided smile, and then raised his hands as Hamza glared at him. What? I thought Americans liked quippy one-liners in these situations. Hamza smacked him in the back of the head, and Barker couldn't help but laugh. The captain motioned to the hole in the wall. Azib, see if you can track that blood, he instructed. Keep your distance, however. Azib nodded and sprinted out of the building through the hole in the wall, following the splashes of blue blood on the ground. How do we fight this creature, Captain? Hamza asked. Is there more rebar left? Barker asked, turning back to him. Hamza nodded. Plenty, he replied. Start pulling it out, Barker replied. I have an idea. Chapter 7. Several minutes went by before Azib came back into the building. He stopped and looked at the other two, who were binding rebar together like Barker's original staff, but adding knives to either end. They pried the 4 barbs apart enough to wedge the handle in, and then zip-tied it tight. You want to use spears against it, Azib claimed. Barker nodded. I got a knife into its back by keeping its shield activated for 5 seconds, he explained. We almost had it this time, but just couldn't pull it off. Maybe with some reach we can make it happen. Azib, what did you find? Hamza asked. The blood led out of town towards the direction of the ship, he replied, waving a hand over his shoulder. Hamza nodded. We should hurry, Captain, he urged. It may have something on that ship that Azib and your sergeant may not have found. Barker tightened the zip tie on the last rebar spear so that each of them had one. Get your weapon and let's move, he declared. The 3 men each raised a 6-foot-long rebar spear with blades sticking out of each end. They were low-tech, but the right tool for the job, and that was what mattered. They rushed out the hole in the wall, going over to the truck that Azib and Wilson had driven in. Hamza got into the driver's seat as the other 2 hopped in the back. They took off towards the ship, following the blue blood as it shimmered in the moonlight. There was a tense silence in the back as Barker and Azib glanced at each other. Despite being bound by this mission, they both knew that once they were able to stop the alien, they'd have a difficult situation to deal with. That didn't make for easy small talk. Hamza stopped the truck just short of the ship, the blood trail leading inside. The 3 men got out and Barker took point, with a man on each side flanking him. What is the layout of the ship? The captain asked. The front is to the left, Azib explained, motioning with his spear. It is a small space that is wrecked. Storage to the right. It is wide open. There is a hole on the far side, too. 2 front attack, Hamza suggested. Barker nodded. Sounds good to me, he said. Azib, would you cover the rear? Wait for us to get it in there and keep its attention, then strike. It will not know what hit it, Azib confirmed, and then took off around the back. Hamza cocked his head. What if our guest is not in the cargo hold? He asked hesitantly. Then we have some work to do, Barker replied. The 2 men readied their weapons as they approached the ship, the captain leading the way with his unlikely companion just behind him. He carefully entered, getting to the edge of the hallway, looking both ways for signs of movement. He listened carefully after not spotting anything, perking up when he heard some movement coming from the cockpit. He motioned to Hamza that was where the creature was. Barker communicated with hand signals, motioning for Hamza to move to the cargo bay, and he would bring the alien back. Barker peeked around the corner, making sure the alien was out of sight before motioning for Hamza to move. Once he'd taken up position in the back, Barker prepared to move. The captain held his makeshift rebar weapon tightly as he moved up towards the cockpit. There was a fierce noise, almost sounding like a banging coming through it. As he got closer, he saw the alien trying to do some work on a panel on the side of the ship. Barker wasn't sure what it was up to, and didn't really want to know. He pulled out his handgun, aiming it carefully and pulling the trigger a couple of times, hitting the alien in the back. The creature let out a scream as it turned, agitated that its work had been disrupted. "Knock, knock!" Barker sang the words, and the alien broke away from the panel and ran towards Barker, who immediately turned and started sprinting down the hallway towards the cargo hold. As the alien got in the clear, it activated the plasma sword, swinging it in the captain's direction. Barker ducked down to avoid the horizontal swing and jammed the tip of the spear into the creature's chest, pushing forward as hard as he could to put the alien off balance, even if the shield was blocking the attack. The creature was forced back a step, its shield activated. As it regained its footing and prepared to swing, Hamza came in and jammed the tip of the knife into the alien's side. 3 seconds after the shield had become active, the alien didn't go after the rebar spears, rather swinging for the men. It had just enough reach with the plasma sword to force Barker to dive backwards, the tip narrowly missing the bridge of his nose. Hamza continued to push as the shield entered 4 seconds of activity. The alien reached down with its free hand, grabbing the rebar and pulling it away from its body, just long enough for the shield to disengage. "Shit," Barker muttered, rushing it again, and he was met with Hamza as the alien was strong enough to force them together. The rebar swung to the side and the 2 men crashed into each other and then to the ground as the creature rushed towards them, dragging the spear on the ground. Hamza shoved Barker out of the way, catching some of the blade on the arm. The weapon seared right through Hamza's wrist, cauterizing the wound but taking the hand. He screamed, rolling away from the creature in shock and pain as it reset for another strike. The alien raised the sword, bringing it down hard towards Barker's head. He managed to swing the rebar around to counter it. The heated blade sank into the metal, quickly melting into it. Heated rebar dripped onto Barker's face, burning him as he struggled to move the blade away. Just before the plasma sword went completely through the staff, Azib rushed in from the hole in the ship. He let out a scream as he plowed into the alien from the side, lowering his shoulder and leading with both it and the tip of the spear. The prismatic shield activated as he shoved the creature backwards. He had too much momentum, however, as the alien was able to step to the side and throw him towards the wall of the ship. The 3 men regrouped despite their injuries, as did the alien, resulting in a tense standoff. Hamza hefted his spear up to rest on his stump forearm, staring hard at the creature that had taken his hand. Barker moved first, stepping up with a jab, and the alien sliced through it, hitting it at the weak point where the captain had blocked with it before. He dropped the front part, spinning around the back half to get the other knife in place. Hamza rushed in, using his wounded arm as a platform to slide the spear towards the alien, which the creature swatted away, spinning in the process. Hamza stumbled past it as the alien brought the sword down across his back. It wasn't an immediately fatal strike, but it cut from his shoulder blade through his hip. A couple inches deep, the smell of burnt flesh rose in the cargo hold as he fell to his knees. Azib tried to strike next, but the alien stepped to the side, dodging the thrust and delivering a forceful kick to his chest, sending him stumbling backwards. Barker lunged in, jabbing his spear forward. Rather than block it, the alien brought the sword down hard. Barker saw this and thrust the spear upwards to block. The sword cut into his shoulder, getting 6 inches deep before the captain could get the spear up to block. Barker struggled to hold the sword at bay, his shoulder near blinding with pain. He looked down at the spear, which was quickly melting, and felt an almost sort of zen at the fact that his time was up. Azib rushed the creature, shrieking in Arabic, lowering his shoulder and barreling into it. As he hit, Barker thrust up with the blocking spear. This removed the sword from his shoulder, but his spear was again cut in half, leaving only a 1.5 long piece with the knife. Azib shoved the alien into the wall, pushing with everything he had. The creature swung its sword, catching him in the cut about mid-torso height. Azib had the spear pulled close to him, however, preventing the blade from going completely through him. Hamza rushed in, stabbing the alien in the sword arm, activating the shield and preventing it from freeing it. 2 seconds. The alien struggled but couldn't free itself as the prismatic shield continued to ripple. 3 seconds. Azib stared intently at the alien, grinning a bloody toothy smile. 4 seconds. Barker rushed in from the other side, jamming the tip of what was left of the spear into the neck of the alien, the shield shimmering as it began to flicker. 5 seconds. The alien screamed as the shield gave way, allowing Hamza to stab the sword generator, deactivating it. Barker's blade pierced the alien's neck, sending a geyser of blue blood spraying onto the wall. The captain drew his handgun immediately, jamming it against the alien's face and pulling the trigger as fast as he could. Bullets ripped through the face covering, violently sending the alien's head jerking back and forth at the impacts. The creature's body slumped to the ground, taking Azib with it, and Hamza knelt, gripping his second-in-command's shoulder tightly. "Azib!" he bellowed, and the younger man could only give a bloody grin before the life drained from his eyes. Hamza swallowed hard, brushing a hand down his friend's eyes to close them, before gently laying him back. "You did well, my friend. Rest now," he murmured. Barker dropped to one knee as the air in the room became eerily calm. The wound on his shoulder was severe, his arm losing the ability to move as the adrenaline left his body. Hamza staggered as well, for the same reason, the wound on his back causing him terrible pain. He summoned enough strength to move over to Barker, helping him to his feet. "Come, Captain," he huffed. "This cold metal ship is no place to die." Barker nodded as the two leaned on each other, walking outside into the moonlit night. They didn't get too far before collapsing in the sand. Rather than fight it, both men rolled onto their backs with shared hisses, staring up at the beautiful night sky. They both knew they were done for. Their wounds were severe, and even if they could somehow make it back to the village, they wouldn't have the resources or know-how to get themselves healthy again. Nor would they be able to contact help. The sky was brilliant with stars, and Barker stared up at it with wonder. "First time seeing the stars outside of the city, Captain?" Hamza asked, voice almost lazy as he gazed up as well. Barker nodded half-heartedly. "Spent years out here, but never took the time to look up and admire the scenery," he admitted. "It is a shame you did not get to do that more in this life," Hamza said. The captain chuckled, and then winced at the pain the motion caused him. "Perhaps the next," he said, and they lapsed into silence for a time. "We paid a heavy price today," Hamza finally said. Barker swallowed hard. "But it was a price worth paying," he said hoarsely. "Agreed, Captain," Hamza replied. They were quiet again for a while, admiring the view, waiting for death. "Look, a shooting star," Hamza said, and started to raise his hand to point, but lacked the strength. Barker's brow furrowed. "There goes another one," he said, "and another one." The duo went deathly silent when they realized that this wasn't just a coincidence of multiple shooting stars. The sky lit up with thousands of streaks, all of them moving with controlled speed, some branching off in different directions. It quickly became apparent that their sacrifice had indeed not been worth it. The only thing they had managed to do was eliminate one of the fleet that was now descending onto the planet. Barker couldn't help but wish he'd died just a moment sooner, as the light faded from his eyes, so that he wouldn't be leaving this world with the knowledge of what this meant. The invasion of Earth had begun. The end.